Welcome to this video. This is the first of a series of videos on games-based learning. And the series after this one will be on gamification. So what's the difference between a games-based lesson and gamification? A games-based lesson means a lesson where most, and sometimes all, of the learning and practice of English is in games. Gamification of a lesson is different. Individual activities within a gamified lesson may or may not be games. But there is an overall gamification theme that ties a lesson, a course, or even a semester together. And engaging game elements are applied during lessons to motivate the children. Gamification may be especially appropriate when a school or an education authority frowns on using too many games as classroom activities. For example, in my case, I have tended to gamify lessons when teaching in public schools. But when I have had complete freedom to do things as I like, my lessons are very game-based. The arguments against games-based lessons are understandable. In the wrong hands, playing games in class can be a waste of valuable time and can even make children less interested in learning. But when used well, they can be by far the most effective way to maximize learning in a lesson. I think it comes down to our approach to using games. And I will look at some of the most important elements in an effective games-based approach in this series of videos. Integrating play and learning. Games play a central role in the lives of almost all children, and most children easily become completely immersed in their favorite games. Wouldn't it be great if these children were equally positive about learning English in our classes? This is definitely possible. And the most effective way of achieving this is to make our lessons games-based. But we also need to ensure that play and learning are fully integrated. If the games are just being played for their own sake, the consequences can often be negative. If learning itself feels like a game, and if children feel like they are discovering a fascinating new world of English through games that they would also enjoy outside the classroom, it is much more likely that the children will be motivated to learn English both in the class and between lessons away from the class. And it is much more likely that they will use English in their daily lives. Games are for learning. Effective child-centered games-based learning is where play and learning happen at the same time. In a more teacher-centered approach, new words or patterns tend to be taught by the teacher before playing the games. This is, in effect, treating the children as blank slates. It is saying, "Follow me. You learn because I teach. Now practice the new language targets in the game." The game is just being used for practicing, not for learning. Some teachers even go further and assume that games are a kind of light relief, or a reward for studying hard, or for good behavior. The teacher may say something like, "If you study hard, we'll play your favorite game." This is missing the point of having games in the first place, and can often have more of a negative effect on learning than a positive one. Some children will come to see the serious parts of the lesson as what they have to go through in order to play games. These children will probably begin to separate learning from having fun. And over time, they may become restless during the serious language practice sections, or just mechanically follow the teacher. They may only become fully engaged when playing the games. The teacher may even have to use games as bribes, saying things like, "Keep quiet" or "No bingo." Games are not simply for practicing language targets. They are where the most effective learning takes place. A child who encounters a new English word, expression, or pattern while she is immersed in a game is far more motivated to learn it, and much more likely to internalize it than a child who receives new knowledge from the teacher before the game. How to integrate play and learning. Let's look at a 3-in-a-row game. In this game, pictures or words are arranged in a grid, and the children, or teams, take turns to choose or throw something at them. When they select or hit a picture or word, they perform a language task with it, such as making a personalized sentence using the word. The aim of the game is to try to get 3 in a row either vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. For each 3 in a row, the children could get a point, a goal for a soccer scoring system, a run for a baseball scoring system, or anything else like that. If some of the words in the game are new, a more teacher-centered teacher will probably teach them before the game. But it is much more effective if the children discover them while playing. This is treating the children as explorers, not blank slates. The game motivates them to try to understand and use the new words. If the words are phonically regular, the children can find out what the new words are by trying to read them. If the children need your help, you can hint and interact with them so that the children are learning, not being taught. If a child makes a mistake without realizing it, you can indicate that there has been a mistake in a fun way and encourage her to self-correct, with your hints if necessary. Keep the focus on learning. It is essential that the children do not see our English lessons as a time to play games for their own sake. The last thing we want is for the children to constantly look for stimulation from the exciting new games. The best way to prevent this from happening is to find games the children like and use them wisely. For example, it is best to stop a game before the children want to stop, so that the next time we introduce the game, the children feel, "Oh, that's the game we wanted to play more last time, but we couldn't." By using games wisely, we can keep the children's interest in the same games, but make the language content more difficult each time they play. They enjoy the game and don't feel they want to change it. So they get their stimulation from the challenge of the increasingly difficult English, not from the change of game. For this to work well, we need games where the language content can easily be changed. When we are thinking of using a game in class or developing a game ourselves, a key question to ask is, how can the language evolve inside this game? If we find the language content can easily evolve, the game can be used for learning. If the language content cannot evolve very much, the children can easily end up repeating things they already know rather mindlessly. I think it is helpful to think in terms of having a basket of games that we use with the class. The games in the basket steadily evolve over time as the children's English develops. Some games will become less appropriate, so we take them out of the basket and replace them with new games. This steady approach makes it less likely that the children will become dependent on new games to keep them motivated. How much emphasis should there be on games? I think the answer to this depends on our definition of a game. If we think of a game as being something like tic-tac-toe, go fish, or what's the time, Mr. Wolf? There are generally times in a lesson when we also need to do other things. Though I've had very successful lessons where the children play these kinds of games all the time. However, if we define a game more broadly as a fun and engaging structured activity, then, except perhaps with very academic children or with children who are highly motivated without games, almost all activities in a class can be games or contain game elements. The important thing is for the children to feel deeply involved in our lessons. Games are the best way of achieving this, but they are not the only way. It depends on the children. There are some children who are fully engaged when sitting down quietly by themselves writing sentences. And there are other children who are fully engaged when practicing a straightforward dialogue. Of course, we can make any activity into a game. For example, in the case of a quiet writing activity, the children could write on a treasure island map or a bingo grid. But if the children are engaged anyway, there is often no need to do this. Every class is different, and every child is unique. We need to find out what kind of activities fully involve each of our classes, and, when possible, each child within a class. When is the most important time to play games? I think the most important time to play games is when the children are encountering core language targets for the first time. The aim is for the children to encounter new words and patterns when they are totally immersed in what they are doing. And the more fun they are having when they encounter the new language targets, the better this approach works. A teacher using a more teacher-centered approach may sterilize the way children encounter language targets for the first time by explaining, demonstrating, or drilling the targets, and then use games to practice them afterwards. I think this is the wrong way around. In an effective child-centered approach, the exact opposite happens. The children first come across new targets inside an engaging activity, and then later may do some less game-like activities, such as writing sentences in a workbook. Should games be quiet or lively? Children need plenty of physical activity for their mental and physical health. Physical activity can also make the learning of new language targets more memorable, especially for younger children. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the language games need to involve a lot of physical activity. One issue is that after a physically active game, it can sometimes be difficult for the children to focus on a quieter activity. Another issue is that some children run around without using or learning much English. Running around can even be a way for some children to avoid needing to concentrate and think deeply about English. There are a lot of great physically active games for learning English. But I think what really matters when playing a game is mental activity rather than physical activity. The children need to be concentrating and reflecting on the English they are learning. Of course, it is great when a game involves both mental and physical activity. Personally, when I start teaching new elementary school classes, I concentrate on building a trusting relationship with the children and on motivating them to focus on learning English. And I find this easier to achieve with quieter games. At this early stage, the children are also still getting to know what behavior is acceptable and not acceptable in my class. Then, as I establish a trusting relationship and a positive learning environment, I increase the percentage of activities that are more physically active. But whether the games are quiet or active, the children are using English all the time. And play and learning are fully integrated. In the next video, I will look at the psychology behind a good game. Thank you very much for watching.